Hello everyone, welcome to Tattva Conversations and Explorations. We recently concluded our series on mathematics, exploring it as an idea, a tool, and as something out there. We'd like to thank all our guests for their generosity with their time and knowledge. Here are some of the common and some not so common questions that they answered for all of us. Enjoy.
I personally do feel there's a very strong divine element, and he's very right in saying what he's saying. I don't think he was joking. I don't think he was delusional. I don't think he was, this is purely a figment of his imagination and superstition and all of that. I think Ramanujan was speaking the truth when he said this is what's happening to him. Now it's up to us or up to skeptics to say yay or nay, but that's not his business to convince the other person. But I certainly feel he's captured in whatever manner that he could the divine essence of, the divine essence, the kind of truth that's very much there in doing something for its sake, in doing something at this level that takes you up to this level of beauty. There has to be a sacred element, there has to be a mystical element, there has to be a divine element. And it's a bit of a shame that we are so cagey about this in the modern century. Like you've said, in the 21st century, in even this day and age, Indians, even if they don't express it, they get a sense. And I'd say that goes for many Asians and people from many other cultures as well. They sort of quietly, in inverted commas or in brackets, say, yes, we understand what this is. There must be a sacred element. We understand the divine. Getting a sense of the divine, understanding the divine might be very different from being able to explain it or being able to prove it, or being able to even express it in a way that lends itself to the scientific opening up and pairing of everything that we do. Maybe it does not fit in very nicely to this, filing cabinet way of thinking that I was previously talking about. It doesn't fit very evenly into technique, the technical, the technological, or even robotic. But I think it's an absolutely essential element. And we see this across the board throughout all cultures in ancient mathematics, which was no different from worship. And in fact, if I could write a book about mathematics and worship, I would do that.
So ancient mathematicians, you're talking about way back, the ancient Greeks?
Absolutely. There was no separation between astrology, astronomy, mathematics, geometry, and worship, and creating altars for sacrifices and creating domes in all kinds of astronomical measurements were, they were not only linked to harvest times and food, etc., but they were very interrelated, interlinked to the deity, to the temple, to the sense of the divine, to the sense of the, something much greater than you. What was that? Why was that so? You see it in the shards of pottery in the Indus Valley civilization, for instance. They had a very strong sense of geometry and understanding. Certainly they understood circles and how circles fitted into constrained areas around, say, the earthen pot or whatever you were looking at. There are many instances of these discoveries, that they've made of shards of pottery, and they have these amazing patterns around them that could be very modern, that could feature, in any pattern, even on a wallpaper. So where was this coming from? Why did we separate from this kind of divine mathematics, from sacred mathematics? I mean, even until the other day, there was, sacred geometry, not in the traditional sense of how we understand sacred geometry, but sacred geometry in all Japanese mathematics, in the Edo period, for example. So anytime you made even a new discovery, it would be an offering to the temple, you see. So you would take your mathematical puzzle and sangaku, and you would take it to the altar of the temple. And it was very interlinked with the temple and with the, with religion, with religare, in a philosophical sense. So why this sudden separation now, and why this deep hesitancy to talk about the divine, to talk about the sacred, to even question it, to talk about mystical numbers? There's a whole chapter. Again, I mentioned my book here.
So when you go to a temple, you go, and if you like to present something, like we generally in India, we take maybe flowers, we take some betel leaf, we take some, sometimes milk. So the things that we consider, I've never thought about it before, but these are the things we take to the temple. In my family, these were most of the things I saw. So flowers are beautiful, they are natural, there is such grace in them, milk is pure. So these are the kind of things that we take to the temple. So now if you're taking like the Japanese culture in the Edo period, what you were saying, if you're taking something that is purely mathematical, so you see it worthy of being given to something that we don't understand. This is worthy of showing you my gratitude in some way. So that's the divine element that you're talking about.
Yes, and the divine element of also how you came upon the solution to something.
Upon the solution to something, yeah.
The question on a box very often, so you have these beautiful wooden carved boxes, which are actually mathematical, that they have from time. And that type of mathematics, again, was quite different from the standard Western mathematics of that time, because somehow Japan was quite isolated during that period, historically. So it had that time to develop its own type of mathematics, which was actually very rich in this, which had this sacred relationship. So very unusual kind of geometry came about, a very different way of thinking. From the outside, you wouldn't even understand what the child is doing if they did that type of mathematics, It's a kind of temple mathematics, temple geometry. So of course, they may lead to the same solution. It may lead to calculus, for example, but it was done in a very different way. The thought process was very different. And I certainly wasn't in that time, or any of us, to know firsthand, but I think this is a very telling.
I think what you're saying is, here's a little argument that Platonic heaven is real, that the numbers actually exist, is that we have these people existing on opposite sides of the planet, hundreds of years apart, finding the same thing. What's the best explanation of that? There must be a thing that they're finding. It would be like, if math is invented, it would be like some person in England in 1900 writing a novel, and then some other person 500 years ago, and they had no connection, in India writing the same novel. What are the odds of that? This is a super interesting and cool thought. My own view is the argument doesn't work, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, so two things. This, touching back to what we were just talking about, the numbers, if they exist, aren't doing anything. They're not like coming down into our heads, right? And like causing us. So the numbers would be playing no role in the discoveries. So that's one thought. Like how would them existing lead to the discoveries? But I think here's the more important part, is that there's an easier explanation of the different discoveries of the same fact that doesn't go through the objects existing. And it goes like this. There's a very beginning of the story that everybody knows. Everybody knows this story. There's a number 0, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then they keep going. Got it? Yeah, that's the whole story. Everybody go to your corners and think about it. And here's the thing. Once that's set, once that initial idea is set, it logically entails everything else. All the other facts about the numbers fall out of that by rock solid logic. It's necessary. If you assume that the story about what the numbers are, if they exist, all the facts about them fall out of it. Okay, so now the facts are set by the initial story that everybody knows. Just a little blip of like 0, 1, 2, 3, and keep going. All the facts are set. The person in England in 1900 is thinking and comes up with an idea based on that. And the person in India 500 years earlier, 1,000 years earlier, has the same thought and comes up with it. But there is something objective. The objective fact is what follows logically from the basic story of numbers. And that's what they're both discovering. And so there is something objective there, but it doesn't have to be the existence of the numbers. It's facts that follow by logic from the story of the numbers.
1728 and 1729, both of these numbers, on one hand, figure prominently in Ramanujan's life. On the other hand, believe it or not, the number first appears in the Kurma Purana. In the Kurma Purana, the author, whoever the super genius author that wrote the Kurma Purana, is actually talking about dhyana and measurement of concentrations.
Wow.
So actually, many of the Puranas have lots of numbers in them. Even in the Ramayana, you have these gargantuan numbers. The point is the idea: what is dhyana? What is dharana? What is dhyana? What is samadhi? So these are the last three steps in Patanjali's Raj Yoga. the concentration of the mind on a particular idea for a period of 12 seconds is called one dharana. Concentrating the mind for 12 dharanas is one dhyana. Concentrating the mind for another 12 dhyanas plus one more second is samadhi. That's 1729. Wow. So 12 times 12 times 12 is 1728. One more second beyond leads you to 1729 seconds, which works to roughly, I calculated, it's about half an hour. So if you can keep your mind focused on a particular idea for 30 minutes, you have enlightenment.
It's probably a combination of things. So there is a sort of existing perception of maths in society, which for whatever reason it's occurred and people sort of perpetrate it. So you'll find, people will say, oh, don't worry if you're struggling with this maths. I was never any good at maths when I was at school. Or they'll say, oh, that's difficult. If you see a TV show where there's a kid who's got some homework that they're really struggling with, it's always maths homework. And it's sort of become that character within the universe of subjects, that it's the one that is horrible, that everyone hates. That in itself is quite annoying, because it's a thing that people keep either deliberately or otherwise perpetrating and continuing to repeat, which is really unhelpful. And I often see mathematician colleagues seeing, advertising campaigns and saying, oh, why is it saying maths? Why could it not be some history or some geography homework that someone's stuck on or whatever? But then at the same time, there's sort of an underlying point that actually maths is quite hard. It's not the easiest subject, and I'm not saying that other subjects are easy in comparison. Being a historian is an incredibly difficult task, and it's a mess to sort out what's true and what's something that someone just said, and what how good your sources are and that kind of thing. All subjects have their own separate challenges, but I think one of the things about maths is it's possible to be 100% correct. You can get 100% in a maths test because you can write down all of the correct answers, right? And it kind of adds this sort of pressure of like, are you actually right or are you wrong? Because there's some subjects where, depending on, it can be quite black and white in that way, and I think that's also part of this false perception. So yes, you can get all of the right answers in a maths exam, but as someone who now marks maths exams quite regularly, one thing that I really want to get across to people is that actually, if you write all the right things but not actually the right answer, I know that you understand the concept. I know that you are aware of how all of the things fit together. I'm aware that you understand this piece of mathematics, but maybe you put a plus instead of a minus somewhere. I kind of don't care about that. I'm going to give you a pretty good mark even if you've made a tiny mistake somewhere, because the rest of it, because I can see that you understand this thing. And if you write out loads and loads of calculations, but they're the wrong ones, or, even if all of them are correct, I don't think you understand. The mark isn't necessarily based on exactly getting the right answers. And I think one thing that people don't realize about mathematicians is that we really get things wrong quite often. But one thing that we have is that we have both an understanding of what we think the answer probably should be. We've got a sense of, actually, there's no way it's going to be that, because it should be 100 times bigger than that. I must have done something wrong somewhere. I'll go back. And also that sort of ability to analyze our own work and go back and find those errors. It's actually one of the bits of research that I've been doing at the minute into maths education stuff was around the idea of making mistakes. And we were talking to one of our undergraduate classes, and we essentially ran a session with them where we got me and one of the other lecturers in the maths department to do some maths problems on a blackboard that we'd never seen before. And it was really interesting because the students are very used to seeing maths lecturers who've got the notes for the course that they're teaching, and they've taught it several times before, and they know exactly what all the answers are going to be. And they come in and they say, here's how you do this calculation, and they show them everything, and it all works perfectly. And we'd literally been given, I think it was some A-level questions, so sort of upper high school level questions that we'd not seen before. And obviously me and this other lecturer hadn't even done that kind of level of maths for quite a few years. And it was all stuff that we definitely were capable of, but we got these questions out and we sort of looked at them completely fresh in front of the students and had a go. And we got it wrong. We got some of the bits wrong. Some of the bits were like, I can't remember what to do here. I'm going to have to look it up on the internet. Got my phone out and Googled it. There was some bits where I did a calculation on the board, made a mistake, and then spotted it and went back and fixed it. And it was really interesting for the students because a lot of them had this perception of, if you are a mathematician, it means you're really good at doing things right the first time and you never get anything wrong. And I'm like, maybe there are some people who are like that, but the vast majority of people are not like that, because maths is difficult. It's easy to make mistakes, and it's not about never making any mistakes. It's about understanding the subject enough that you can tell when something comes out wrong that it's probably wrong, or that when something's right. You know different ways of checking it. If you get the answer to a thing, put it back into the equation you started with and see if it comes out with the right answer, sort of thing. The thing that we were trying to get across to them was not that we are perfect to do everything right first time, but that we've got those tools and we understand enough about what we're doing to be able to make those checks. And that was a real kind of learning experience for the students, because we did some little interviews with them afterwards and we got them to fill in some questionnaires about it. And some of them were genuinely shocked, and they were like, I thought these people were clever.
I can imagine. Yeah.
But actually what we were trying to do was get them to reevaluate their notion of what clever is, really, because when they are sat doing that work, they're going to make mistakes and they're going to get to points where they're stuck and they don't know what to do next. And if your perception is that that means you're bad at maths, or that you're stupid, or that you can't do it, it will stop you. It'll cut you off, and it'll make you feel like you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. And actually that is completely the opposite. And real mathematicians, whatever that means, and doing finger quotes there, do have that experience. They get stuck, they get confused, they make a mistake, but it's part of the process. It isn't wrong and it isn't bad. It's just part of what goes on.
My way of dealing with daily life issues comes from my training in mathematics. So for example, I was in my college, and I received a phone call that my mother is not well. And then just that one thing sort of tends to disorient you a little bit, and then you were like, okay, what exactly am I supposed to do right now? But then I think when I took a step back, and then I figured out that, okay, this is exactly the problem with her, and then all I have to do is send her to a hospital, and then myself I have to keep calm and then figure out how do I get to her. So the next order of business of booking tickets, etc., and then reaching her on time, and then all throughout this entire process making sure that neither her nor my father is panicking about this whole situation. I think my mathematical training really helped me to deal with this particular situation, because I think it is very easy to get carried away by just knowing that someone so very close to you is undergoing a surgery for something regarding their health, and then that could lead to something very however, knowing that, okay, in this moment, what exactly is going to help the situation, I think really made my whole life in that moment streamlined.
The kind of work that I do right now, I'm looking at dental plaque on our teeth. Those are formed by microbes like bacteria or fungi. And then we look at that and we use mathematical models to understand how these microbes interact with each other. And the reason why we do that is that experiments are there, they're great, to understand what's happening between these microbes. But sometimes it takes a long time to do these experiments, whereas these mathematical models might recreate that situation in a lesser time. So we can look at different scenarios at a shorter time, like for example, if you want to see whether these two bacteria are just fighting for resources, or you want to see whether one bacteria is affecting another, the experiments may take, days. Like it'll take 24 hours to grow the bacteria, then you have to image it, then you have to count those images, all of that. Whereas the actual model, the mathematical model or the simulation may take 2 hours, 1 hour max. So the time, so we can do different scenarios, and then we can give the experimentalists, hey, try this scenario. Maybe this scenario might be the reason why these bacteria are acting the way they're acting. It's helping the experimentalists, decide which experiments to spend their time on.
It'll be great to know if these conversations influenced your worldview in any way. As we continue our conversations and explorations further, we're moving on to the next subject, which is language. In March and April, we'll be speaking with linguists, professors, and philosophers of language to understand it better. We hope you find them interesting and useful. Goodbye and take care.